and we'll get going. So, working in the heat of the fire, dirty with soot, the blacksmith takes a piece of metal and he heats it up, and he keeps hitting it and reheating it and hitting it again until eventually he dunks it into the water. The metal is stronger because it's gone through the fire. We have all been going through our own individual fires this past year and even into 2021. We've all been scorched in some form or fashion. For some of us, it's been the loss of a loved one. For some, it's been the loss of their businesses. For students and parents, it's been the loss of rites of passage, not attending graduations or seeing your kid off to college, or the transition from elementary school into middle school. For many, it's been the loss of financial security. And for those on the front lines, our first responders and our teachers and our counselors, the losses are huge and things that we probably can't even begin to fathom. But we are resilient. The fire has made us stronger. Now, I do want to thank all of you for being here today, because it's a Friday, and for some parts of the world, it's a nice sunny day, or it's a Friday evening. So welcome to the attendees. They're from the United Kingdom, because there were several of you that signed up, and some from Canada, and then some that are in other parts of the United States. So I know I saw Nevada and California, and I'm sure other states besides Texas that are here. So welcome and thank you for being here. And just some quick little note-keeping things. The slides are copyrighted, so please don't make any copies of them. Feel free to share the information in tweets and posts and things that you're learning. And do try to make sure your mics are turned off. And for the chat box, if you can keep that just to questions, that will be really helpful. We're going to try to get to any questions at the end so that we can make sure to get through all of the material quickly and efficiently. But there are over 308 of you that signed up for today's talk. And I'm sure it's more than that. That's just the last number that I remember. So let's jump right into this. Well, we talked about that resiliency, and we had to reschedule this event because, well, in Texas, and actually 70% of the United States, we were covered with snow. And that is definitely a historical situation. And if you know anything about Texas, that's a pretty big state. So we were all, covered in some form or fashion. And so I apologize for having delayed this talk a couple of weeks, but a lot of the attendees had no power in order to watch this particular presentation. So first things first, let's take a look at some of these questions that come up, because sometimes we don't realize when we're being affected by something. So just taking a look at some of the things that come up and going, okay, well, have you been experiencing frustration? Okay, hello, who hasn't? Frustrated with all sorts of things, from the mail being slow or the mail being lost to not being able to find the things that you need at a grocery store. But we can also be frustrated that we had certain goals. We had things on our bucket list, things that we wanted to achieve, and COVID has just knocked that down. I mean, I can say it's disappointing because I have a significant anniversary coming up next month, and I had always had this dream of, well, we're going to travel to so-and-so to celebrate it. And well, that's off the table for right now. Many of us have felt under pressure, and pressure is that burden. And you can feel it physically, but you can also feel it mentally. And you then have stress. And again, that's a mental and physical situation. Now, not all stress is bad. There's actually something we call U stress, EU stress. And that's a stress we actually look forward to, or at least hopefully in these examples of, having a kiddo, expecting, hopefully that's a positive experience, or getting married. So yeah, stressful, but it's something you're willingly doing. And there have been a lot of people that have been nervous. Well, let's just talk about doing all of the online meetings. The thought of like, oh my gosh, my face is going to be on this screen. It's going to look huge, and I'm going to be directly interacting with all these people. And what if the technology fails? And what if? So yeah, some nervousness, some anxiety, that's been coming up. And then for many people, they've started to feel overwhelmed. My office has a whole ocean theme to it. And so I often talk with people when I'm doing counseling intakes, or do it for the coaching intakes too, of, does it feel like you're out in the ocean and the water is just like right there? It's right at your mouth. And at any point, that next wave is going to come over you and you go down. That's feeling overwhelmed. And some people have gone to being panicked or even having panic attacks. Some have gone to being scared. And then some feel completely out of sorts. They feel out of control. So that's some of what anxiety looks like. Sometimes the media doesn't do the greatest job in explaining anxiety. So this is to really understand these are the traits. These are the characteristics of feeling anxious. And it's a human situation. There are times that if you don't feel anxious, I'm not sure if you're alive. So anxiety serves a purpose, but in all things, there's a balance to be had. If you notice that you've been experiencing some of these symptoms, insomnia, oof, I bet some of those sleep medications, those have been prescribed a whole lot more in the last year. Digestive issues, ditto. I'm sure that there have been a lot more prescriptions written for antacids and stomach ailments and all sorts of things that go from the top to the bottom of the GI. Some people may not even be eating, much less, again, getting good quality sleep. So something else that has come up with things related to COVID is maybe you've been feeling a little blue, down in the dumps. Maybe motivation stinks. That's something we've seen with a whole lot of students, that motivation has been woo, and students that had previously said, ugh, I just hate going to school, they're actually saying, I never thought I would say this, but I miss school. I miss being in a classroom. I'm tired of being online. And I've got a lot of students that have been expressing that. The quarantining has been extremely difficult on students. And the physiological and the psychological implications of that, I think we're going to be seeing for, by some estimates, the next decade, the damage that it's been doing. The decreased energy. Well, if you're just sitting around all day on a screen, you could be doing that for hours. You're not getting physical activity, versus if you're in the office, you're walking back and forth in a hallway, or in a classroom, you're walking to your next class. Unless you got one of these little smartwatches reminding you, hey, time to get up and do your 250 steps for the hour, it's really easy to just sit. And the more you sit, the more your energy goes down. And that can lead to wanting to sleep more. And sometimes you start to sleep too much and you actually feel more tired from it. And there are many individuals that know they need to eat, but the thought of chewing food just really turns their stomach. It's like, ugh. And maybe it's too much effort to eat. Or maybe that's a piece of the anxiety that comes in if they're so stressed out, their stomach is just clenched up. And they don't enjoy things. They're not looking forward to anything because, well, a lot of things they used to enjoy doing, they can't do it anymore. And so that's taken away that joy of life. And some people have started to want to be by themselves. You have that isolation component, and that can tie into social anxiety. And we know that for our students and for even millennials, social anxiety disorder was an issue of stress of talking on the phone, like actually picking up a phone and answering a call was stressful prior to COVID. Now we've all been isolating and doing everything through technology. Who knows what's going to happen with social anxiety at that point? And the irritability, the crankiness, maybe that's coming out for you as being a little bit more sensitive to comments. We're all hypersensitive. I mean, if there's a doubt on that, go to social media and see how hypersensitive people are. And you can feel sad. So depression, and we often, a lot of times we shy away from that word of like, oh, well, I'm not depressed. There's a stigma to it, but we need to really name it. We need to understand what it is. And so these are the signs, these are the symptoms of feeling depressed. And if we can't acknowledge, if we can't put a name to what we're experiencing, then how do we get help with it? And I won't, read through all of those, but obviously there are some that are really concerning. And one of the big risk factors for a suicide attempt is hopelessness. When you've lost hope, what do you have to live for? So that is a biggie that we want to pay attention to. We need to ask individuals, are you feeling hopeless? And related to that, I would say, are you feeling helpless? So here's one of the things that I think an important piece to understand is that anxiety and depression work together. And truly, if you have one, you're probably going to experience the other. They work in tandem. And it can often be that chicken egg situation of, well, which one came first? And sometimes it really doesn't make that much of a difference. But it is understanding that they're related. And that's oftentimes why we have medications that are dual purpose. That Prozac, for example, Lexapro, Celexa, Zoloft, they're dual purpose that they cover anxiety and depression both. Now, consequences of ignoring these symptoms, because is it possible they could just pass? Sure, it is. We get back to normal, quote unquote, and it's possible it could just pass, but what if it doesn't? Because realistically, we don't know when we're going to go back to normal. And the reality is we'll probably never go back to things as they were pre-COVID. It's like with 9/11. We never went back to things how they were pre-9/11. The airports were forever changed. How we did airport security, how we did a lot of things changed after that event. And it's going to be the same with COVID. There are some things that are just going to be different. And as a professional speaker, there's been much talk of, are we ever going to really go back to in-person speaking events again, the way we used to? And that's a big question. But for school's probably going to be permanently changed, where for some districts, they might decide to continue with the hybrid system. And travel, I think, is definitely going to be forever changed. At work, we also see in the workplace, a lot of companies have realized we can save a lot of money here by not renting office space and allow them to work at home. But here's the underside of that. Companies have also realized people that work from home, a lot of them are working more hours. Companies are getting free labor, so they're getting more work out of an employee and they're saving money on rent. So that's one of the risk factors of working from home, is the burnout piece. But for school, what could a consequence be? Well, yeah, decreased productivity. You're missing assignments. You know, if you're depressed or you're anxious, you're not able to focus, you're not remembering things. Maybe if you're feeling sort of that sad or anxious, depressed, whatever, you might be more irritable. So maybe you're getting a little testy at home with your family members. Maybe because some of these symptoms are creeping in, you're losing your job because you're not showing up, or your work ethic has really slipped. And then whether it's in a school setting or in a work setting, and yes, adults do self-injure. Make no mistake about that. I recently did an interview with the Australian company, Workplace Mental Health Institute, and we discussed this in particular of self-injury and also suicide in the workplace. So these are just some of the consequences we may experience if we do not pay attention to what's going on and we try to just ignore those symptoms that we previously mentioned. And again, I'm going to try and keep the Q&A towards the end. But here's a question that comes up. Do I have to go on medication? Well, not necessarily, no. And I'll be honest, I'm not a huge medication person. I'm very much the let's rule out all the other things first. Let's look at all the other, what I call that trifecta of mental and physical health. And let's see what can happen with implementing some coping skills, some techniques, before we necessarily run into the medication part. Because sometimes, unfortunately, the medications have side effects. And sometimes those side effects complicate the healing process. But medication does have its purpose. There are times when medication is absolutely needed, and it does need to be looked at. If someone is so severely depressed that they can't even get out of bed, they cannot function, they are actively suicidal, then yes, time is of the essence, and they need to get assessed quickly. But I will say, and as a note, I'm not a medical doctor, so this is not medical advice. This is my little legal jargon. I am not a doctor. I don't pretend to play a doctor. I am not a nutritionist. The things I'm about to say are based on a lot of training, a lot of research, but I do not actually hold those qualifications. But as I said, it's based on a lot of research I've been doing over the years and a lot of training and events that I've attended led by medical doctors and nutritionists. So one thing I always encourage people, one of the very first things we talk about when we do our counseling intake is, when were your last labs done? When was blood work completed? And unfortunately, many people say, well, I haven't had labs done in years. Well, most insurance companies cover your physical, which includes blood work, once a year. And at the very least, I would say every other year. So it's a good idea to get some labs done just to see where your baseline is, see how things are progressing, catch things before they show up as a problem. And in particular, what we like to look at is thyroid, because an underactive thyroid tends to go more with depressive type symptoms. And an overactive thyroid, what we call hyperthyroid, is more correlated with anxiety. So hypo, less, underperforming thyroid goes with depression, low metabolism, weight gain, low energy. Hyper goes with more of that anxiety piece of it, and maybe difficulty keeping weight on. Vitamins B as in boy and D, those we look at because those are your energy vitamins. And in America, one study that I saw said that we are 40% or 40% of Americans are vitamin D deficient. Now, we've talked a lot about vitamin D lately because of COVID, and we have seen a correlation between low vitamin D and poor COVID outcomes. So vitamin D is a really key player in your immune system, but also your energy level and depression. Because I started to see kiddos years ago that were presenting with depression, and we started to talk about, well, when were your last labs? And they're like, oh, you know, the doctor said they're low in vitamin D, so we're going to start a supplement. And sure enough, the nutrition piece improved and the symptoms started to go down. So you want to rule out some of these things, because if you can do it through diet and exercise too, then let's look at that versus jumping down a different rabbit hole. And iron's another one we look at, and especially for females, because low iron levels tend to, again, mimic as depression. It's a low energy situation. And for females of a certain age set, that once a month you can become borderline anemic, and depending on some other female hormonal issues, you very well may become anemic because of well, the level of blood loss. So those are things to just be aware of. And there are other things in addition to those, but those are like the highlights. And medical rule outs. Closed head injuries, traumatic brain injuries, concussions, those we see more and more research coming out of depression. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Daniel Amen and the Amen clinics, that is something that he is a huge researcher on, and has done tens of thousands of brain scans, and has seen this correlation of head injuries and depression and other psychological cognitive issues. So we want to rule out that, because that's going to be a different treatment protocol. Coronary assessments. For anxiety, you can have MVP, and that doesn't mean most valuable player. It's mitral valve prolapse. And what that is that your heart has an odd little rhythm to it. It feels like it's throwing in this extra kind of beat, or a skipping a beat. And that can even trigger a panic attack. So you can feel it in your heart of like, something's not right here. And that can trigger some anxious responses. Lyme disease, we have seen different cases where that mimics as depression, and even some other more severe psychological situations. And your gut biome, digestive issues. Did you know the vast majority of your immune system is in your gut? And also about 80% of serotonin, which is one of your like, woo, happy neurotransmitters, is produced in your gut. So if you don't eat healthy, you're not eating well. And we know that during COVID, there's been a lot of weight gain because we've been eating cruddy. We've not been eating probably really healthy stuff when we've been shut down, and some of that goes to the depression. And some of that may be just the lack of food, and you eat what you can get. It's a survival situation. But when we don't eat healthy, our body and our mind suffer for it. And then I had alluded to some of the female things that we want to rule out, and that's premenstrual dysphoric disorder, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and endometriosis, because those have all been seen to be connected into things like depression and mood swings and irritability. And I have had some individuals misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder that when they got a medical exam and when we started to look at things, it was one of those diagnoses instead. That's a pretty serious boo-boo, because being put on bipolar meds when it's actually a hormonal issue, So it's always good to just get that physical. Be aware of what's going on in your body. And this connects into what I call the trifecta of self-care. And this trifecta helps you on a physical and psychological level. And by far, one of the most important things is sleep. That is the cornerstone. Because when sleep gets messed up, it is a domino effect. So if someone is struggling with sleep, there are plenty of different ways to assist with that. Exercise does help with quality of sleep. The kinds of things we eat help with the quality of sleep. And if you have racing thoughts, which is not uncommon to go along with insomnia, meaning you can't shut your brain off, then there are some medications that can assist with that. And there's also coping skill techniques. It's not just the counting sheep. There are other ways to distract yourself. Progressive muscle relaxation can be helpful. Guided imagery can be helpful. And there are different apps on the phone that can help you take those thoughts and redirect them to somewhere else. But our sleep influences our nutrition. One study said that, at least in America, when we didn't get enough sleep, we ate 40% more calories the following day to compensate for our low energy level. Now, some people may not feel that low energy until the second day. But the problem being is that we're trying to compensate for our tiredness with not great stuff, because most people aren't grabbing some of the nutritious things like green tea to boost their energy. They're grabbing the energy drinks that are laden with huge amounts of sugar and things that might create some heart palpitations. And then if we're eating cruddy throughout the day, we're doing this up and down situation of like sugar spike, sugar scratch, bottom out, sugar high, sugar low. And it's a roller coaster, up and down. Well, by the end of the day, are you going to really feel like doing physical activity? Probably not. And so whatever the stressors are of the day, well, those are cumulative. They've been building up. Exercise is a way to release those stress hormones. It's a way to clear your head of the day's stressors. But if you don't exercise, you've got all that junk trapped in your body and in your brain, and now you're going to try to go to sleep at night, and guess what? It's not going to work. You're probably going to be there stiff as a board, just waiting for your body to relax. And that's going to take a while. And you're laying in bed, and that's when your brain is trying to process the events of the day and then thinking ahead to the next day. So exercise helps you physically and psychologically, and there's so much research that supports that. So much research that supports all three of those. Now, I have two things on the side, the social outlets, which obviously in the era of COVID, that's been problematic. We're social creatures. Even the most introverted individual still needs social contact. And yeah, it's great that we can talk to people through a screen, but it's not the same as person to person, right there in the moment interaction. Because when you're talking to someone that's directly in front of you, you can pick up on their nonverbals better. You pick up, for lack of a better word, their vibe. You can pick up on that energy that they're sending out. And you really get a feel of where they're at. And dear heavens, we miss physical touch. I mean, family members can't really even hug each other anymore unless they live in the same household. But not being able to hug that grandparent, not being able to hug a parent that lives in a different house for fear of, well, what if I give it to them? If I'm a carrier and I don't even know I'm a carrier. And that anxiety alone of the what ifing, whew, that has taken a toll. So our social outlets have been greatly squashed. And we have to get really creative of how to have interaction with people just in safe ways. Some states have done that better than others. And I think it reflects and maybe the health piece of it. But go out to parks, because at least you can see another person. You go, oh my gosh, there's other people still out there in the world. You know, I loved how in Europe and Italy, there were a lot of these pictures of people going out to their balconies in the evening and just being able to wave one another. So you still felt like we're still connecting in some way. And then the spiritual part. And there's been a lot of research out there. When I do a talk called Stress Management, the Mind-Body Connection, where I go more into these principles and more on coping skills and talking in more depth about panic attacks and how to not just prevent panic attacks, but also how to understand it and work through a panic attack. Well, in that presentation, we go into the research about the spiritual component and how much research has said that people that have some spiritual connection, some sense that there's something bigger than themselves, they deal with life better. They're able to make more sense of the world. They have more hope. They're more optimistic. And if you're more optimistic, that tends to improve your psychological health, which in turn improves your physiological health. So those are the components to really look at in your life, or if you have clients, to help them really assess. So how do we master this chaos in our mind? Because we've all had it in the last year. We've all experienced some sense of chaos. And it doesn't mean that we're weak or we're flawed. It means we're human. And we're trying to respond as normal as we can in a very abnormal situation. But we want to be really careful of giving those cliches. And I got this meme off of Reddit, which, I mean, that's a little bit of a dangerous place as a note. And if you're a parent, be aware of the social media your kid is consuming, because a lot of it is making things worse for them. And we've got a lot of research that substantiates that social media is not really healthy for kiddos or young adults. And it's actually increased a lot of anxiety and depression. But this came from, I'm assuming, a more cynical individual. And we want to say, oh, it's just going to be okay, and let's just paint the rainbow. And maybe at some point it's going to be okay, but we can't dismiss that right now it doesn't feel okay. And it feels overwhelming for a lot of people. And maybe for some of you, it's felt really overwhelming. And we want to surround ourselves with people that can help us and be good supports, but also understanding that sometimes we have to sit with it and grieve those losses. We really do need to allow the grief process to happen. And we need to acknowledge that sometimes things really do stink. And it's not a great situation. But we don't want to stay in that place. And one of the phrases I frequently will use is live, learn, and move on. You're going to live your experiences, but learn from them. And then you got to pick up and move on and be empowered with the knowledge you just took from that experience. So another thing that I look at frequently is this pro-con list. Sometimes things are really that simple. We don't have to make it that complicated. Sometimes really, truly, it's a pro-con list. You have a negative thought, you have an anxious thought, a worry, pro-con it. What supports the thought and what doesn't support the thought? And really put it to paper, because there's something much more significant about putting it to paper than just trying to do it in your head, because that's your own writing, staring back at you. It's more real when it's on paper. And it grounds your thinking. And when you have to stop and think about these things, you're moving from your emotional brain into a more logical, more of this cerebral part of your brain. And yeah, not all of the things on one side or the other are going to be of equal weight. So do consider that. So here's an example of doing a pro-con thing. I failed the test. And maybe you're thinking, I'm never going to pass any test ever again. Well, but have you passed other tests? You know, what about well, I didn't get the promotion. I've been there for a year and I didn't get a promotion. Well, what are some other things that don't support the thought that, you know, you're not worthy of having a promotion? Could be that maybe you didn't meet all the job criteria. And maybe you don't have as much experience as the other person. Maybe it's not all about politics. Maybe there's some other things that you're not aware of that's influencing that decision. What about the boss or the teacher doesn't like me? Well, do they even know you? Have you made efforts to get to know them? Because if someone doesn't know you, then how can they promote you? And maybe you need to reflect on, well, what are some of the positives you've had happen in your life? What are some of the awards you have been given? Because it's really easy to focus on all the negatives and all the things we don't have or we can't do. And it's so incredibly easy to forget all of the successes we've previously had. And that can be helpful to write those down. Take a moment, get yourself to stop and think, what are the awards? What are the accolades? What are the positive statements people have made to you? What are the accomplishments that you've attained? Focusing on character traits as well. It's not always about performance. Focus on the character because that is sustainable. Things come and go, accomplishments do, but character, that's a lot more stable. So how do we break some of this anxiety? And these are my mantras. These are the things I give other clients, and I have for years. So this is how you work through the anxiety. This is how you ground yourself back into that reality. When your anxiety is what-ifing and spiraling up and outward, this is how we bring it back down to the present. Anxiety is the absence of control. Understand that when you feel anxious, it's because there is something you don't feel in control over. So the next logical question is going to be, well, if I'm feeling out of control over something, how do I take back control? And that leads us to the mantra. This is my go-to mantra, and this has truly been helpful for so many clients, whether that's coaching clients or counseling clients. This has helped them get back into the present, the here and now, get them grounded. And that is, I can only control myself, no one else, nothing else. That is it, end of story. I can control me. What's in that circle, that's why I chose the hula hoop. You in that circle, that is all you can control, is yourself. But how often do we get ourselves needlessly anxious and upset because we're trying to control somebody else or something else? Well, probably more often than we like to admit. So here's the example I would give, and why that doesn't work is, think about a baby. An infant is 100% dependent on its caregiver, 100%. How many of you have had a baby that had the meltdown and seemingly no reason? Like something came over them and they became possessed, and you can't control that baby, can you? No, you can't. You know, you can't control when a baby projectile vomits everywhere. And you can't control a toddler when they decide to have a meltdown right there in the middle of the store. And it's overwhelming. And you're like, oh my gosh, people are looking. This is so embarrassing. You can't control that stuff. So here's the thing, if you can't even control a baby, then why on earth do you think you can control a teenager that has their own mind, their own personality, or an adult? If we can't control a baby and getting them to do everything that we want them to do, we have to really put that in perspective of when we're trying to control an adult or a situation. And again, it goes back to you can only control you, and that's it. And that goes into, okay, well, to really take that in, if you can only control you, and this is part of the grounding as well. So what do I choose? Keyword there, what do I choose to control? Right there, you just took back control with that statement. I choose to control. And then decide how many minutes that's going to be. Is that in the next 5 minutes, the next 10 minutes, 30 minutes? What is it in that moment when you're feeling anxious that you can make a decision to start to control? And maybe it's in a 60-second increment. What in the next 60 seconds can I choose to control? Well, I can choose to leave a situation. I can choose to do my breathing exercises. I can choose to let my mind calm down and play catch up. I can choose to do one of the tips in dealing with a panic attack. I can choose to go sit down somewhere. So you hopefully get the idea of we're looking at the opportunity for small, quick successes. Simple, quick things you can do very instantaneously that helps you feel in control, that moves you out of that emotional brain into the more logical, grounded brain. And on dealing on the depression piece of it, all of these different things we've been talking about help with depression management. But some days, some hours still feel so overwhelming, and it feels like such a major effort to do anything at all. So I want you to think in these terms, that really each day, and for some of you even down to each minute, is a battle. And in that battle, you have choices in how you will respond. Each time a skirmish comes up, each time there's a challenge, see it and call it out for what it is. It is a battle. And we all get battle laden, we get tired from the battle, but we need to call it what it is. Of sometimes in dealing with anxiety and depression, it is a daily, hourly, minute by minute battle, and you need to have to see it as you're a fighter, you're a warrior, you're a soldier, and keep pushing through, because at some point you're gonna break that line and you're going to make progress. You're going to move forward. You will be the victor. And some days you may end up retreating a little bit, but don't stay in that position. Keep moving forward. If you have to retreat, stop, gather yourself, live, learn, pull together your resources, and then you attack it the next day. But depression is a battle. It's a monster. Depression and anxiety really are nasty little monsters that like to lie to you. They like to fill you with all sorts of negativity and self-doubt, and you need to slay that monster. So maybe some of those visuals can help of when that negative thought comes in, slay the monster. Fight it. Be the winner, because the only time you're going to lose that battle is if you quit. And we are all resilient enough to be the victors in this battle against COVID and all of the psychological and physiological implications of it. We can win this. You can win this. So a quick review of some of the things we've talked about today. If you've been experiencing any of the symptoms, sadness, low motivation, anxiety, overwhelm, stress, panic attacks, whatever the case may be, go ahead and get some blood work done. Do a checkup, get a physical. Just make sure everything is on the up and up. See if there's any tweaks that you can do. Looking at that trifecta, how's your sleep? Well, what are the things you can do to improve your sleep? Get on a regular sleep schedule. Get physical activity to help with racing thoughts. Before you go to bed, get a notepad and write down all the things you have to do the next day, so that way you don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget this. Keep a notepad on your nightstand. And when you have that thought that hits you, scribble it down, and then you can release it to go to sleep. Have relaxation apps on your phone. Make sure your environment is conducive to sleep. Don't have bright lights on. Make sure it's a good temperature, it's comfy. Wearing socks actually does help with quality of sleep. Look at your nutrition. We are what we eat, and our health is directly connected into what we eat. So pay attention to that. For activities you can do, the pro-con list. Think of the control mantra, minute by minute, what's in your control. That you can only control you, that's it. And always remember that the symptoms, that depression, that anxiety, they like to lie to you. They fill you with all sorts of negative self-talk, and battle those lies. Slay them, and you can slay them with a pro-con list. You challenge them, but don't give in to them. Be the warrior. Now, some additional resources, because I did touch on the self-injury piece, and that is my area of expertise, is non-suicidal self-injury. And it was an epidemic, an international epidemic prior to COVID. The numbers have only skyrocketed since COVID and the quarantining. So Workplace Mental Health Institute, they did I think it was like a 30-minute interview with me, and it's up on their YouTube channel. And if you follow me on LinkedIn or on one of my Facebook pages, then you'll be able to watch the YouTube interview too. But they also have a magazine that they printed the highlights as well. And you can just go to their website and you can get their magazine, because there's a whole lot of great articles in the February edition of that magazine. But this is one resource if you're wanting to understand that particular situation, because it's not an if, it's a when you come across someone with a history of self-injury. And self-injury is strongly correlated with suicide. Injury is not suicide, to be very clear about that. But people that self-injure, at least 60% of them have had suicidal thoughts or attempts. And this week on March 2nd, To Write Love on Her Arms, which I'm a big fan and have been for like a decade, and they're an international group as well. We did a podcast, and it was released on their website. It's also on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on a couple of the other podcast stations. But yeah, it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on their website, To Write Love on Their Arms, Twolo. And we did an episode about self-injury and really demystifying it, getting through the myths, going through tips if you're a caregiver, what to do, what not to do, things that can either make it better or worse. And so it was a great thing. They had two individuals that had a history of self-injury themselves. They were both adults, as a note. And hearing their stories was just wow. And even more resources to throw out there. And some of these, I'm going to send this out in an email to you so that you can have the actual links to these things that you can share with others. But I do provide a teen girls non-suicidal self-injury support group and also a caregivers of those that self-harm support group. Those are all online right now. And the beauty of it is because they're online and they're more under a coaching title, anybody in the United States, anybody in the world can attend those groups. So if that's of interest, whether you're in Scotland or in London or Canada or California or wherever, you can join those groups and just email me for the details. There is a private Facebook group that I've established that's in SSI, and then it's spelled out non-suicidal self-injury, prevent, educate, intervene. You have to answer 3 questions to join that private Facebook group. And then for those wanting to, again, go even deeper, there's the Caregiver's Guide to Self-Injury, which is the first of the 4 books that I wrote on this behavior. And that's available on my website. It's available also on Amazon and on Kindle. And it's a very easy to read, easy to understand book that when you're in the moment of crisis, you can go exactly to that section and get the information you need without having to read it cover to cover first. And then this is one of my big announcements, because self-injury is such a major issue and it's not going away. I mean, it's been around for over a millennia, probably actually more closely. It's been around, documented cases for at least 2,000 years. And so I am launching the Institute for Non-Suicidal Self-Injury, and is an institute that will not only have the training, my self-injury prevention intervention program and proven protocol, that's for school districts, that's for treatment centers, it's for assisting businesses, counseling centers, but it's also a place where research is going to be posted. And it's also going to be a think tank where there's going to be resources to understand this behavior, where we can collaborate, where we can share information. So the initial Facebook page has been launched for it, and I'm currently working on the website because this is a brand new initiative. And I will be doing online trainings through the Institute and finally working on some of those modules as well. So we do want to take a moment and thank Innovations for being our Zoom and CEU sponsor. Please check them out. Please get familiar with the Innovations services. They do such great work, and they have several different resources and locations to assist you with. And then my staff, who's very helpful and patient with me at Van and Associates. And as Carly said, she will be sending out the CEU information, the questionnaire, for you to be able to get your 1-hour credit if you're a licensed person in the state of Texas. And we did record this so that you can have access to it. I'll put it on my YouTube channel and also other sites. And if you're wanting more information, whether it's about self-injury, about suicide, about upcoming speaking events I'm doing, speaking services, the different media interviews that I give, training, et cetera, or if you have questions, please write down. You can screenshot this. Please feel free to screenshot this. But email me, Lori@lorivan.com. If you have questions, please feel free to email me and let me know. And these are, of course, all the little happy places you can find me. At the Van Associates or lorivan.com, find me, ask questions. So going to switch over and see. Okay, for answering questions. So copy of the PowerPoint. I don't actually give copies of the PowerPoints because that's copyrighted material that I do. I share some of those slides and other presentations that I give where individuals do pay for that content. But the actual video, as I said, today's webinar has been recorded and that will be available. So if you're needing to send that, share that with a client, share it with one of your colleagues, you're going to be able to do that. Now, they can't get the CEU credit. You have to watch it live to get the CEU credit. just by board rules on things, but it'll be available. Other questions that y'all might have? Oh, well, thank you, Andrea. You are very welcome. I appreciate that. So please, any questions whatsoever about the presentation, about the resources, just, yeah, in general, I'm available. I'll hang out here for a little bit. Carly, I don't know, Carly or Erin, if there's anything that y'all need to say before we tidy up.
No, I just want to thank you so much, Lori, for presenting and wish everybody a happy Friday. And I enjoyed it so much. So that's it. And if you guys, I know, need to hop off, please feel free at the hour mark. And then if there's any questions, I know Lori will keep looking at the chat box for a few more minutes here. Thank you.
And y'all are very welcome. Thank you so much for attending. And I mean, I love doing this. I get super excited to, get to pass along this information, and just, my hashtag is here to serve. So, I'm here to serve you, to serve the community, to serve your clients, your colleagues, in whatever way I can. And if it's not something I can directly do, then I got a lot of connections. I know a lot of people and resources, so I'll pass those along to you if I can't directly help you in some way. But any other questions? So do you have recommendations on good books for parents who are raising a child who struggles with anxiety? There are probably a couple on that. Burns, and I just totally forgot his first name. I feel bad about that. He's a researcher, it's been a counselor, he's been around for a long time. David Burns, that's it. And he has done some different anxiety workbooks that I think are pretty user-friendly. And so Dr. Burns would be a resource on anxiety. And I do believe he did one that is for minors, for kids or teenagers on that part. The actual name is escaping me because I'm not good so much on remembering exact names. But if you put in Amazon Dr. Burns or Dr. I think it's David Burns and anxiety, his books should come up. Other resources along those lines, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, which has been proven to be like one of the best ways to deal with anxiety and depression. And Aaron Beck, B-E-C-K, he's the founder of it. And I know that he and Christine Podesky, that they've written a whole bunch of different books, and several of them were geared for the layperson to assist in, and workbook format to help better understand. And then there's a new one that's come out. Dr. Daniel Amen has, and I really think this is going to be great for kiddos because he uses dragons. It's so cute. And he talks about people's different dragons and how different life experiences influence which of the dragons, which of the 12 dragons that you have. And I think the name of the book is called Taming Your Dragons. And he also talks about ants. And so he has little pictures of cute little ants dressed up in different clothes, and they represent different negative thoughts, because ant is a, automatic negative thought. So I think that makes it really kid friendly because it's a great visual. You can get in your head. It helps explain the concepts really well. So, very welcome on it, supporting the education community, because what I do want to say, and I meant to say it earlier, for all of you that are on the front lines, and especially in the schools, oh, wow. And most definitely our first responders, anyone that's in the medical community and law enforcement, fire departments, thank you. Thank you so much for your service. The community, the world owes you a debt of gratitude. And for those that are our fellow mental health practitioners, thank you for your continued service. because we've all been inundated. We've never seen numbers like this coming into our treatment centers or into our clinics and our private practices. So thank you all for your service. Like, truly, thank you. So recommendations for a client who constantly talks about suicide but says they have no plan to harm themselves or anyone else. Should suggest a support group, psychiatrist. Definitely, I would go on the counseling part. Anyone that's discussing suicidal ideation very much would recommend that they get an evaluation. If they have the stigma of like counseling, mental health, fine. You know, get someone that does the coaching that has a mental health background. Like, just don't send them to a general coach. Send them to someone that, and there are a lot of us out there that we're mental health practitioners, we're licensed, but we also do coaching. So we have a better understanding of things, and especially risk factors like that. So sometimes that can be an option. Support groups, I would say, as a supplement. I would very much still go individual first, the supplement with the support group, and then psychiatry quite possibly, but I would also want to do that medical rule out first, and psychiatrists don't always call for the blood work. So going to a primary doctor, a family doctor, get the labs done. They can tell you if there's anything going on or not. And then you can further look into possible psychiatrists on that piece of medication. If he's not willing to do the work or put in the effort. Oh, a resistant client? We've had a few of those. Fun. I guess some of it depends where you're at in your relationship with them. If it's been a good working relationship, sometimes you can push this a little bit more than, I wouldn't do it in an early relationship therapeutically, but I would challenge them and go, I'm like, well, I'm really curious that you are reporting these things and I'm giving you some recommendations, but yet there's this lack of follow through. So I'm just a little bit confused of, why the lack of follow through is. Are you wanting to, trying to think the best way to say this, of one, just really, and I know you've probably already asked them the why aren't you following through, and if it's more depression based, like it's severe depression, then yeah, we probably need to look at a medication assessment, because some individuals, their lack of compliance isn't resistance, it's they really don't have it in them to follow through. It's like the symptoms are way up here and the ability to do the cognitive pieces in the back seat. So we have to get them on some kind of medication to move the symptoms back. So this actually has a chance of kicking in. So that'd be the one rule out. If it's just resistance because maybe they actually don't want to be in therapy. Maybe they're forced to be there. That's a whole other discussion. And you have to work on how to phrase this, but some people, they get an ulterior benefit. There's some benefit they get from being depressed, and maybe that's because they're getting some kind of attention from people that previously ignored them. And it's not calling them attention seekers, please don't do that, but it's understanding a little bit of the mindset of maybe it's that negative attention is still better than no attention at all. So maybe we really need to look at that. Maybe we need to look at some self-esteem issues and some of those personal beliefs they have about themselves. And do they believe that they are worthy to change, worthy to get better? So that's, he's come back to counseling 3 times. The lack of follow through. This last time is suicide talk started. He's getting a physical today. Woohoo, good. He's coming willingly. Okay, very positive things that I'm hearing on this, Laura. Good stuff. And dealing with the firemen, you're dealing with a different psyche. It's challenging for first responders to seek help. And I don't know how much experience you have working with first responders, but there's definitely a level of resistance there. And it's not because they're trying to be boogers about it. they're used to helping everyone else. They're used to having those answers. They're used to being the savers of people. So for them to ask for help, that's hard. That's challenging their belief about themselves. And an element of pride might go with that too, if they're feeling really vulnerable. And that's in direct contrast to who they're supposed to be as a fireman, or police officers are in the same boat, or veterans, soldiers. They see themselves as that I have to be the knight. I have to be the one that saves people. And if I'm not able to do it, then who am I? So there's a whole lot of stuff to get into that. Let's see. Read through here. Yeah, working with him on seem worth. Okay. So great. Well, any other questions? Because it's going to be close to 10 after. Anything else that you have on your mind? Direct message. How do I do? And you are very welcome, Leonard. I'm very glad to assist and help out. But if there's nothing else, I'll put just, there's a quick thing. If you think of a question afterwards, because isn't that how it always happens? Is that we go, oh, I should have asked that. I meant to ask that. Or, oh, I didn't really think of it in that context. So I'll put the contact info up here just so you can have that in case anything pops up. Although good, I'm glad that, that was helpful. Good. So otherwise, I'll let y'all go and have an awesome Friday, whether this is Friday afternoon or for some of you, Friday evening. And be safe, be blessed, and yeah, I'll see you later. And for some of you in Texas, I'll be sending out information about my 3-hour ethics talk that I'm going to be doing in May.
Thank you, Lori. Y'all take care.